black skin, black kings stand majestic with the black king. Today I'll sing you a black song, you need to hear about you, black king. Most time we hear about black, we hear about black magic and black here but not one is a make a black life. See here a Leon Cole. Find out from a girl black you a jen. Find out from a girl black you a jen. Work hard just make it a black yard. Yard to describe my black you a jen. Hold on. I see enough racist songs, but this is not a racist song. This is a song for the children who was never told about where the race is from. And they want to hear it in the favorite songs. Everybody come and say slavery songs. What of a woman the babies come. I start with all things like Joe Guns, Black Kevin and Bush, Black Kings, Black Senate and Bush. But these old pyramids and beauty significance to the physical roots. So every word when we sing black, in my word everything black. Black, white, black, white. So don't be surprised when you see the king black come. But told us that black is beautiful. Never told us black is beautiful. Never told us that black is beautiful. Never told us. Never told us that black. Oh no.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cleveland Tomlinson. I'm the president of the Debating and Public Speaking Society, and I'm a student at the University of Technology, Jamaica. I will be a master of ceremony for today's distinguished lecture. I am trying to share my screen, but I believe the functionality is preventing me from doing that. Can you confirm that you are hearing me? And I will try to open my camera again for you to see me. And can you confirm that you are seeing me?
Both hearing and seeing.
Okay.
Yes, hearing and seeing.
And I'm being heard. Thank you. I want to use this opportunity to welcome you to NIA Chapter. Public lecture honoring our ancestor. To the president. University of the NIA chapter has decided to execute lecture to commemorate the abolishment of slavery, the abolishment of the transatlantic slavery. We also decided to execute this event to strengthen our call for reparatory justice to be given. We here at the University of Technology, Jamaica, certainly support reparations, and we throw our full weight behind it. And as student leaders in our own capacities, we are strengthening our call for reparations, and we want to add to the national consensus that there is a need, a justification, and it is the right thing to be done. We have special invited guests with us, and we are going to get right into the program. And at this time, we want to welcome our special invited guests and to welcome everyone else for joining us today. We have Melda Brown, Lady President of the Church Teachers College, UNIA Chapter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, our Lady President could not make it, so I am the female Vice President that will do the ritual in her place. And the reading comes to us from Psalm 68, verse 31. Prince shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall come shall soon stretch forth our hands unto God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, representative from the Church Teachers College. We are going to proceed with our program, and in that regard, I invite at this time Mr. Dave Foster, chaplain of the Church Teachers College UNIA Chapter, to open with the UNIA prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let us pray. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. God of the right, our battles fight. Be with us as of yore. Break down the barriers of might, we reverently implore. Stand with us in our struggles for the triumph of the right, and spread the confusion ever o'er the advocates of might. And let them know that righteousness is mightier than sin, that might is only selfishness and cannot or not win. Endorse, Lord, with faith and grace and courage to endure the wrongs we suffer here apace, and bless us evermore. One God, one aim, one destiny. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Foster, chaplain from the Church Teachers College UNIA Chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important that we gather here this afternoon to commemorate and to bring greater awareness for persons who are not knowledgeable of the history of our ancestors, our history. That history is a strong and powerful history that binds us together as an African diaspora. In that regard, I think it is very apt for the theme of this distinguished lecture to be honoring our ancestors from Africa to present. Certainly, and you will hear it come out more in our lecture today, certainly there is more to our history than the transatlantic trade, and many authors of several well-noted publications have indicated there is so much more powerful to our history than the transatlantic trade. But that aspect of our history has dominated what people perceive us to be. So in that regard, it is important for us to have this lecture today, because we will receive a stimulating presentation from our presenter on the powerful history that we share as people of the African diaspora, a history that long precedes the transatlantic trade. It is a good thing that we're gathered here online, ladies and gentlemen. I want to use this opportunity to invite President of the UNIA ACL Jamaica Division, the well-known and respected champion Pan-Africanist, Mr. Stephen Golden, to bring welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. And let me say greetings, good afternoon to everybody who is joining us, particularly the UNIA members from our college chapters at the Michael University College, Church Teachers College, and of course our hosts from the University of Technology. Big congrats to the team there for putting this together. Today is March 25th. It is the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Since this morning, I've been watching the UN sessions and the speeches that have taken place. The theme this year speaks about, ending slavery's legacy of racism, a global imperative for justice. And I want to thank Mr. Tomlinson for the opening in which he speaks about reparations, because of all the speeches I heard this morning from UN officers, the Deputy Secretary General, head of UNESCO, and others, I did not hear that word reparation one time. I did not hear it one time, and I wonder if it is an issue that they are still grappling with even in this 20th century, and given what we have seen across the globe between last year and this year in the midst of a global pandemic. So I think it's important for us to recognize this day. I want to thank again the UTech chapter for taking the initiative, but this is an internationally, or supposed to be an internationally recognized day. And it fits perfectly in theme. If we're talking about ending slavery's legacy, then nothing is going to end until we start talking about reparation and reparatory justice. And I'm sure our guest speaker today will also do that justice in his theme about honoring our ancestors. Somebody sent me a flyer early this morning. It was a flyer from a speech that Marcus Garvey gave in Atlanta. And the date on it was March 25th, 1917. And the subtitle said, in talking about what he would be addressing in his message, it said, "The Negroes of the West Indies after 78 years of emancipation," in quotations, "with a general talk on the world position of the race." Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock, March 25th, 1917, at the Big Bethel African Methodist Episcopalian Church, corner of Auburn Avenue and Butler Street in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think that's so significant because we're now 104 years since that March 25th, and we still have to be talking about the issues surrounding slavery, its legacies, and the fact that some things have not yet been resolved. So again, kudos to everybody. Listen up. I know our guest speaker, I think I've shared the platform with him before, and I know he's a riveting and strong speaker and advocate for these issues that have affected our race for over 3 centuries. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Golden, for those remarks. We certainly cannot have a substantial conversation about the commemoration of the ending of the transatlantic trade without having a conversation about the need for reparations. I'm a strong and proud proponent of reparations, and from time to time we hear remarks that I consider not to be sufficient, that would seek to tell us that reparations are not relevant and not important at this time. And I continue, and certainly the UNIA chapter of UTech Jamaica continues with its call for reparations, and it can be done in several ways. It's not just about taking up money and giving to countries. It's about many other strategic things that can be done. I personally, and I'm very passionate about this, I hope you pardon me if I can say this, very passionate about the issue. I personally call for debt forgiveness on the international stage, preferential agreements, access to international markets that we otherwise would not have had access to. These are some ways that we can realize our reparations can be given. And I say that I will continue to be a voice for reparations, and I urge you to be one as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Golden. I'm going to invite at this time Mr. Lorenzo Shakes of the UTech UNIA chapter to introduce our keynote speaker for our distinguished lecture. Mr. Shakes, are you here with us?
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone hearing me?
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So, Dr. Jeremy Mcalpine is a reparations and a genocide scholar and an assistant professor in an African American studies at the New Jersey City University. He received his bachelor's in science in political science and international relations and a master's in science from the University of West Indies, Mona. He earned his master's in art and his doctorate in political science from Brown University. Dr. Mcalpine is an international recognized expert and consultant on transitional justice, genocide, and reparation. He has traveled to South Africa, Cambodia, Armenia, and across the United States and Canada, researching and presenting on the Armenian genocide, the transatlantic trade in Africans and reparations, truth commissions, and issues of justice. Dr. Mcalpine specialized in African political philosophy, Caribbean political thought, and transitional justice. His research interests include truth commissions, commissions of inquiry, and political accountability. For history such as injustice of slavery, Native American and Armenian genocide, he has written on the South African Trade and Reconciliation Commission and its development of a restorative justice approach to South Africa's transitional justice issues, as well as the moral justification for the reparations of slavery and the Armenian genocide. Dr. Mcalpine is one of the authors of the landmark Armenian genocide reparation study group supported entitled Resolution with Justice. He was the lead author of part 7 of the report. He focuses on and examines the ethical and moral dimension and desirability of reparations for genocide. His most recent publication are a book chapter on memory and genocide, Remembering the Past in a History of Genocide, Volume 4, The Long 19th Century 2020. He also co-edited Caribbean Reasonings, Rupert Lewis, and the Black Intellectual Tradition 2018, and The Thought of Gordon K. Lewis with Brian Meeks 2015. Also, the Remedian Truth and the Reconciliation Commission in the Journal of Social and Economic Studies, September 2013. Reparation for Slavery in the Americas, the Armenian Review, Spring 2013, and on the Asian Truth Commission in the Global South, Spring 2012. Without further ado, I would like to present Dr. Jeremy Mcalpine.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I know this is not on the program, but I have been advised that there is a presenter. There's someone to give further remarks before our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is someone of distinguished repute, and I've been advised by the organizers that there is someone else to give a few remarks about our keynote speaker before we have his presentation. So in that regard, I'm going to invite Mr. Andre Welch to give us his remarks about the distinguished repute of our keynote speaker. Mr. Welch.
Sorry, Mr. Tomlinson, but Mr. Welsh had communicated to me that his mic is not working, so we cannot hear from him today at the moment.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that, Mr. Martin. In that regard, ladies and gentlemen, it is an extreme pleasure of mine to present to you this distinguished individual, respected locally and internationally for the excellent work that he has done. Our presenter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tomlinson. Thank you, Mr. Hicks, for that very expansive and extensive. I would have rather just the first 2 or 3 lines, but thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you to the UNIA UTech chapter, also associated chapters, MICO, and the other teachers' colleges. Thank you for this opportunity on this very important day where we reckon, because we don't celebrate tragedy, we reckon or we commemorate, right? And so the time when we commemorate and we reckon with the legacies of slavery and honoring our ancestors, I want to focus on the honor of our ancestors rather than the ignominy of slavery and the harsh realities of enslavement. And so the title of my remarks today, if you would bear with me for a little, we may not get through all of it, but we will get through the most salient parts of it. I've chosen to do a PowerPoint so you can follow along. Feel free to hold your questions until I'm done so that we can just have a complete through of the presentation. The theme is honoring our ancestors from Africa to the present. And that is my theme, and I am going to ask for sharing privileges so I can share my screen so that you can follow along. Okay, let me share. Just give me a minute while I bring up the file to be shared. It's taking a while to convert. While we're waiting on that, I just want to talk about what the conversation will entail. I teach African history, especially African civilizations and African diaspora, so I've taught the gamut of African politics. And so what I want to do is really a history lesson on the reality of our ancestors and the ways in which we, sorry, I think the wrong file came over. Let me, that's not the file I want to share. Sorry. Just give me a minute. I'm normally doing black Zoom rather than Blackboard. So just give me a minute as I, all right. I think this is the version of the file. So let me just remove this one. So it will be a historical discussion dealing with the reality of our ancestors. And the focus is not so much on the abolition of slavery, but of the resilience of our ancestors and why we still need that spirit of resilience in 2021. So just bear with me for a moment. Thank you for your time. Welcome to everyone who is on the meeting. And as soon as it's converted, that's what Jesus told Peter, the apostle, when thou art converted, strengthen the brethren. So this file is being converted. It was loading fine before, I'm not sure, but that's technology for you. But I can start the presentation. Okay, here it is. All right, so I'm sharing now. Tell me when you begin to see, if you begin to see. Are you seeing anything?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay. All right, great. So, where did the sharing go? I'm not seeing the screen again. Are you still seeing it?
No, sir, it went off. It came up.
All right.
Off.
Okay. So, here we go again. Here we go. So, when we talk about Africa to the present, I want to take us through a historic odyssey of the last 6.5 million years of time. And you may be trying to count how long is that, but those are estimations. I want to talk about our ancestors and the ancestors of all humanity, because as we will see here, all of life, all of civilization begins in Africa. If you take the biblical reference, it still begins there. The river mentioned in Genesis 2 from 10 through 16 talks about the Gihon. The Gihon is now located in Ethiopia. The Havilah is said to be the land of Punt, which would be modern day Nubia, i.e. Sudan. So when we talk about Africa, I want us to have an understanding and a context of a place that is not just for being plundered, but it's also the place of our beginnings. And so that picture you have there in front of you are some of the great pyramids. Over 100 pyramids were built over 1,500 years in the great Egyptian civilization. And those pyramids began to be built around 2900 BC under Pharaoh Djoser, who was essentially the first person to order the building of pyramids. And it is there that Imhotep, the great polymath and the great astronomer, helps to begin the design for the reality of the pyramids. So I want to take us through that today. But I want to start off with a test, right? I want to start off with a test. And I would love for you to tell me, unmute your mics, and let me know what your answers are. So I'll start with this. Between 1484 and 1880, how many slaves left Africa to come to the Americas? Anyone wants to answer?
0.
Right. 0. Anyone knows why?
Yes, because by then African slavery was not introduced to the Americas.
Okay. Anyone else? Why?
Me, because the Americas was not as developed, and so they had no need for a workforce.
Okay. Anyone else?
Because our ancestors were not slaves.
Yes, thank you very much. That is exactly the answer. So, no slaves came here because no slaves left Africa. People left Africa. And so, the first way we honor our ancestors is by changing our language. No slaves came to the Americas. People, Africans enslaved, came to the Americas. And so, the first thing you learn today is that we honor our ancestors by correcting the way in which we identify them. No slaves left Africa. People left Africa. People from the Congo, from Guinea, from Gambia, from the Senegal, from the region of Ghana and the Gold Coast, from Angola. They left from Benin. They left from Niger. They left from Sudan. But none of them were slaves. They were enslaved. They were made into slave. No one is born a slave. One is made into a slave. So 27 million Africans left Africa between the period 1484, when Portuguese first sailed to Brazil, and all the way until 1880, and approximately only one third of them made it here. So that's the first way we honor our ancestors, correcting our identification of them. I don't care how long you've learned it. Ultimately, that is the reality of it. No slaves came over. People that were enslaved came over. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and I call him Mwalimu. Mwalimu is the Kiswahili word for great teacher. Someone who not only teaches, but someone who teaches greatly. And so Mwalimu Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the raison d'etre of the UNIA, founded in 1914, says this: a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. In other words, we cannot consume the unhealthy diet of the enslavers along with their knowledge, where Africa and her children are relegated to the world's inferiors, and then expect to honor the sacrifices of our ancestors. If we are going to honor the sacrifices of our ancestors, then we must change our knowledge diet. We have been fed a diet of oppression, a diet that argues that Africa didn't have any meaning until Europeans went there to enslave them. That is what we have to reverse. That is what we have to purge our diet of. So our knowledge diet is oftentimes even more unhealthy than our actual physical food. Why? Because what we consume leads to all aspects of our lives. What we consume and we feed our minds can only determine what is grown. So as we say in Jamaica, you can't plant corn and expect to reap peas. You can't plant oppression and expect to reap revolutionary change. You have to plant revolutionary ideas. And revolutionary ideas are not just arming oneself to go and topple somewhere. It starts with the revolution of the mind. Marcus Garvey, again in Philosophies and the Opinion of Marcus Garvey, says you must have mental emancipation. And so when we talk about honoring our ancestors, we have to honor them by learning the truths about who they were. Runoko Rashidi, African-American thinker, says the greatest crime, perhaps, is the one that tells a black child that their history begins with slavery. I was educated all the way through to public schools, from Bob Allen Basic School in the shadow of the National Stadium all the way to the University of the West Indies. I didn't go to a private school until I did my PhD. But all of us at one point or another have been indoctrinated and inculcated with the virus of this lie that says black people don't come into any modern existence until slavery. Runoko Rashidi says that's perhaps the greatest crime. One of my favorite proverbs of all time come from the Ewemina people in the region Benin, Ghana, and Togo. And they say that until the lion gets his own storyteller, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We honor our ancestors from Africa to the present by telling history from the perspective of the lion, right? The lion would never be given the grace of an understanding if it is the hunter that is telling the story. Now, if you can imagine, a lion sees a hunter coming with a rifle pointed at him, what do you think the lion is going to do? He's going to attack. The hunter's story is that, well, I shot him because he attacked me. And the lion's story would be, well, I attacked him because he looked like he was getting ready to slaughter me and my family. So if the lion does not have his story told, the story will always glorify the hunter. Whose story have we been taught? We have been taught this in our schools. We have been indoctrinated with this in our schools. Somehow, blacks were rescued through slavery, and then they were eventually freed by well-meaning, well-thinking Europeans, without ever understanding that for most of the world's history, it was Africa that provides centrality of focus. So we honor our ancestors, secondly, by telling history from the perspective of the lion. And so that symbol there in front of you is the Sankofa, right? And we in Jamaica, we have grills all around, and you may see the second symbol, really two birds united in one, making a heart, on many fences, many grill work, including at the Emancipation Park. You may see many Adinkra symbols. The Adinkra symbols are from the Akan people in Ghana, in West Africa. And so the Sankofa here, depicted as the bird, the first part of the picture, literally means it is not a taboo to return and fetch it. In other words, you can't understand the present and move to the future without understanding and going back to the past. It literally means you can go back to the past. It is based on the Akan phrase. We only say Sankofa, but it is based on the Akan phrase, say, Wowere finawo Sankofa yenki, which simply means it is never a taboo to go back and fetch it, right? You have to understand the past if you are going to move on, right? And I'll get back to Sankofa at the end of our conversation. But let me continue. So if you understand the symbolism of the bird, body is facing forward, but the head is looking back. So the past and the present, I think we often have some responses to it. And I think one of them is missing. So I'll tell you the fifth one, because there should be 5 on the slide. But my presentation is coming up in a very morphed way, but we will continue. So there are 5 responses to the past, right? We sometimes forget it existed. We never learn from it. We sometimes despise it. Sometimes we love it so much that we dwell on it and which we could return. But the 5th response is actually the most important, that we learn from it and use the lessons there to move forward. And that is ultimately the purpose of the past for our present. Learning from the experiences of our ancestors from all the way on the continent of Africa to those who involuntarily, but I will also clarify that most of the earliest trips were actually voluntarily, because the second question I want to ask you will come after this slide. And again, that slide is missing, but I will ask the question, right? Those are the 5 responses to the past. We should choose the 5th one. Learn from the past and use the lessons to move forward. So before we get to what is Africa, and let me see how I can expand my screen to make sure you are seeing everything I am seeing. What is the lowest line you can see on your screen?
It consists of
it's eating parts of the slide, and I'm not sure what's going on. Let me see if I can configure it, but it's it's not allowing me to show you all of the slide. But
sir, you could pick the option that says show view control, and you're able to zoom in and out.
so you said show view control?
Yes.
Okay. I clicked on it, but it's not allowed to do anything else. But we will continue. What is not there at the bottom, I will just tell you from memory. So the second question I want to ask is, can anyone tell me when the first Africans made it to the Americas?
Uh, 1531.
Okay, 1531. Anyone else? Only one guess? Anyone else? When did the first Africans make it to the Americas? So I think Jerome answered and said 1531. So the first Africans actually made it here around 3000 BC. So they actually got to the Americas around 4,000 years before Columbus ever set foot here. And so Ivan van Sertima, Guyanese historian, in his book They Came Before Columbus, traces the ancestry of Africans leaving the continent around 3000 BC, around the time when the Sahara begins to widen as a desert and people begin to move farther away to find new ground and new territory. So the argument being made is that the pyramids that we see across Latin America were actually built by the same people who would have built pyramids in Egypt starting around 2700. So Africa, sorry. So Africa is not a country. Again, we have to learn and understand where we are from and who we are. It's not a country. It is the second largest and second most populous continent after Asia. 30.2 million square kilometers, right? 6% of the Earth's total surface and 20% of its land area, right? With a little over 1 billion people, it accounts for almost 15% of the world's population. That part that you can't see says that it consists of between 1,250 to 2,100 languages and around 3,000 ethnic groups. They are not tribes, they are ethnic groups. You can't call 10 million people belonging to a tribe when Iceland, a country of less than 500,000, is considered a nation. We have to change our language. We have to change our vocabulary. You know, people like to, I think that, you know, Rastafari is problematic for all the words they don't want to say. But let us add to that lexicon ethnic group rather than tribe. They never saw themselves as belonging to tribe. They were people. So that is a picture of Africa. And I put it there so you can understand the geographic, topographic, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, economic, historical diversity of Africa. Africa has 55 countries, 54 of which are independent, and one country, a disputed territory. Morocco is claiming sovereignty over it, and that is the Western Sahara, right? So Africa is diverse. So when we have stereotypes about Africans, when we are people of African descent, we are miseducated. When someone comes to me and say, you know, that person that look like an African, I said, it is not enough for you to tell me that. Find out where the person is from. You look at a person and say, boy, that person look like them come from Europe, you know. No, we seek to account for where they're from. Africa has 54 countries. We in Jamaica have lots of experiences with more recently arrived Africans. Find out where they're from. Find out whether they're from Nigeria or Ghana. Honor your ancestors by being educated about who they were and who we are as a result of who they were. So most of the people who traveled, if you're seeing my arrow, came from this region right here, from the Bight of Benin all the way over to the Congo, because so many of those who went to Haiti came from the Bakongo, the central part of Africa. You have to learn about where you come from in order to know where you are going. And sometimes we think of Africa in such a stereotypically small place. Well, I've mapped for you all the countries that can hold geographically in the continent of Africa, including the world's two most populous countries. So both India and China can hold in Africa, right? The United States can hold in Africa. Japan, all of Southern Europe and all of Eastern Europe can be held in Africa. So when you look on the map of Africa, don't be deceived by how small Africa is represented. Africa could hold all of these countries. So the first myth, and it is there, again, parts of it is put off. I'm not really liking Blackboard Collaborate until someone can solve it. I'm not really liking it, but it is what it is now. So the first myth, so that's what you see up ahead there. Africa had no civilization and history. And I'm pressed for time, and I know we want to go through all of them, but we can't go in detail. So we may have to have a second part of this conversation, right? Africa, that's the first myth. And a myth is not only something that is wrong or false. A myth is something that if enough persons believe it, it becomes what? Truth. And that's why we have to contest where we get our information. In this age of information, we also live in the age of disinformation, false information. How many times has Jackie Chan or Bill Cosby or all the other celebrities died? They have been killed long and so many times before they actually died. We live in an age of disinformation. Find out information and be discerning and discriminatory in your information. So the first myth is this idea that, Africa had no history and Africa had no civilization. Well, let us quickly go through that. Cheikh Anta Diop, preeminent Africanist, said that it is clear that humanity had its birth in the east and center of Africa, right? Because they could not have survived without pigmentation. He says nature does nothing by chance. It's for that reason that humanity of the sub-equatorial region was given melanin, right? That is why melanin was essentially given, because of the proximity to the equator. And so when we talk about civilization, this place here, the cradle of humankind, in South Africa, in the Gauteng province outside of Johannesburg, is called the cradle of humankind for this reason. Because hominin fossils were reputed to have been found millions of years ago there at the cradle of mankind. And we have lots of information to cover, so I want to go to Tanzania and look at the Olduvai Gorge, and there again were the antecedents of modern man, right? When we talk about Africa, we have to talk about fire, we have to talk about fishing, we have to talk about how all these things were harnessed. The animal, the first example of domestication happened in what we call Ethiopia today, around 18,000 years ago, right? We have to begin to understand that the world is far older than we have presumed to date it, because it started keeping a record of history around the time that people begin to write. It is clear that civilization and mankind existed before writing, right? So by the time writing is developed around 3,500 BC, man would have been existing long before that. So astronomy wasn't invented by the little horoscope in your, that comes into your inbox for those who believe that. It was the Egyptians on the Nile who invented stargazing, and they used astronomy and physics to build the pyramids. There's a repeat there. So I want to look quickly at some of the civilizations that have existed before Africans begin to be hurled up and taken here to the Americas. Nubia or Kush. So when we call someone a Nubian king or a Nubian queen, Nubia is now comprising of most of modern day Sudan and parts of Ethiopia and Egypt, right? Nubia establishes a civilization even before Egypt, starting around 4800 BC. So when we talk about Nubia, Nubia existed, and they were called Nubia or Nub, NBW, which means land of gold. So if you're called land of gold, it means that you are abundant in gold. And so much of what builds the treasures of Egypt came from Nubia, because Egypt conquered Nubia around 1575 BC. So here is a Nubian king here leading a procession depicting this Nubian king who was reputed to be Piankhi, Piankhi, and he was the Nubian that started the 25th dynasty in Egypt. And yes, you heard correctly. So Nubia, the neighbor to Egypt, rules or conquers and rules Egypt for 110 years as the 25th dynasty. And so the Nubians conquered Egypt, returned the favor, because Egypt had conquered Nubia for almost 500 years. So we have to understand, you can't honor your ancestors if you don't know who they are. Right? Egypt, everybody knows or thinks they know about Egypt. Egypt was a black civilization. Not only was it geographically Africa, it was also culturally Africa, right? There were actually two Egypts up until 3100 BC, when Egypt is united and the rule of the dynasties begin. Across Egypt from 3100 BC until the time of the Byzantine Empire, around 600 AD, we have 31 dynasties. 26 of those dynasties can be considered local, right, including that of Nubia. And from the 27th dynasty onward, Egypt was ruled by foreigners, the Assyrians, then the Greeks, then the Romans, then later the Arabs and the Byzantine. But Egypt exists not in the way we have seen it depicted by Hollywood, where all the Egyptians are fair-skinned or white. The Egyptians thought of themselves as dark-skinned people, and I'll show you evidence. This here, if anyone tells me who it is, well, let me not get too big. If anyone tells me who this is, then I'm going to see if I can get something to you in terms of a gift or contribution. Anyone wants to guess? I'll take 2 guesses so we can move on. Please don't Google it. Answer.
Is it Anna Tut? Oh gosh, I know this.
King Tut.
No, it's not Tutankhamun. Nope.
Yes, sir. No.
That's not it.
You get a gift for trying, so I want to be in your class.
All right. One more attempt. So this depiction is actually of Queen Hatshepsut. This is one of the 8 women who ruled as pharaohs, not as wives of pharaohs. They ruled as pharaohs. And she is the daughter of Thutmose, and she married her half-brother, Thutmose II. And when he died, she ruled exclusively starting around 1475 BC. So it's important that we understand not just the presence of men, but that we have women who ruled and certainly have the power and the legacy of leadership to do so. So it's not no women are queens, right? They've been queens for a while, and not queens as just because you marry a king, but they ruled. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for about 15 years, and she was one of the most modernizing pharaohs of Egypt. When we look at Nubia, Nubia has Nubian queens called Kandaka, or you'll see in the Bible as Candace. He was the servant of Candace, the Ethiopian eunuch that meets Philip in the book of Acts. The Kandakas were queens, right, or queen mothers, and they fought against Rome, including Amani-Renas, who was who got one eye damaged, but it did not stop her resolve. She ruled Nubia for 40 years, and she defeated Augustus Caesar and the Roman army. So you have to understand your ancestors if you're going to understand who you are. The Empire of Ghana, we think of Ghana only as a modern day country, but Empire of Ghana was far greater than the actual physical country today. Ghana as an empire existed from 770 AD until around 1100 AD. And gold was so prominent in Ghana that Ghana created a trade. You know, we have all these kinds of trade now in the world, including illegal ones. Ghana created a salt for gold trade. That was how prominent Ghana was. That was how priceless salt was in the ancient world. That 1 pound of gold was traded for 1 pound of salt. Because if you can think of Africa, most of Africa would be inland and away from salt or saline water, and so salt was used to preserve things. Ghana cornered salt for gold trade for almost 400 years, and had so much gold deposit that the king controlled gold reserves. Mali, and we see Mali there at the tip of northwestern Africa, right below the Sahara, and that depiction is of Mansa Musa. And to clarify, Mansa is not his name, it is his title. So it was really emperor or sultan. So Mansa means ruler, right? His real name is Musa Kita, and he is reputed to have been the richest man to have ever lived, even more wealthier than Julius Caesar. Is reputed that he was worth $10 trillion. When Mansa Musa was leaving Mali in West Africa to take a pilgrimage across the Sahara and head to Mecca because he had converted to Islam around 1310 AD, he carried around 100 camels laden with gold, and he was giving out gold while he was transmitting. Yes, Daniel, richer than King David or even King Solomon. Mansa Musa had so much gold in his reserve. That is why he is called the wealthiest man to have ever lived, because of how much gold he had at his disposal. Because by 1300, Ghana had been conquered first by the Almoravids from North Africa, and then they were conquered by Mali. Why is all of this history important? So you can understand that we don't begin to honor our ancestors until we know about them. Not just what the storybooks and the history books that are so colonized and Europeanized tell us, but we must go learning about ourselves. Again, the hunter cannot teach the lion how to be a lion. Another lion has to do that. That there is the region of what becomes a Songhai Empire. Songhai eclipses the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire lasts from about 1496 AD until around the 1630s, when Europe begins to think of Africa as a place to exploit. So another myth I want to quickly look at is this idea that, Egypt was so great. There's no way that black people, Africans, could have created that civilization. I've even heard people say that Egypt, the pyramids were created by some aliens who came down and then they went back up after creating the pyramids, right? Anything but to attribute success of Egypt to black people, to African. They would rather give it to aliens than to admit that dark-skinned black people built Egypt into the great civilization it was. And just to clarify, you often see pictures depicting, say, these were the black pharaohs of Egypt. Well, until the 26th dynasty, there were no other color pigmentation of rulers of Egypt than dark-skinned people, because the people of Egypt were dark-skinned. And I'm going to move to the Great Sphinx, pyramid at Giza, built by Khufu and completed by his son Khafre. We often call him maybe one of the longest ruling pharaohs, and they existed under the 8th dynasty of Egypt. Under this dynasty, you have Meresank III, and she was one of the only queens that actually had a pyramid devoted and dedicated to her. She lived around 5,000 years ago, so it means that she would have lived during the 8th dynasty where her grandfather Khufu ruled. Picture you have here depicts, and it was found on the tomb of Ramses III around 1200 BC. If you're following the key, A is how the the Egyptian saw himself. B is how he saw the Indo-European people from the Asian and the European continents today. And C is how he saw other blacks in Africa. D is how he saw people of Semitic origin, meaning those persons from whom we have the ancestry of everyone from the Arabs all the way over to what we call Iran or Mesopotamia. If you look there, the Egyptian did not see himself different from other Africans. This is 1200 BC. Again, as I indicated, before the Assyrians conquer Egypt around 670 AD. So you have to understand that Egypt has been whitened over the years, and so much of what happened during the heyday of Egyptian civilization is often attributed to someone else. The age of the pharaohs really come to an end after Egyptians lose control of their territory. But from 3100 BC until 670 AD, Egyptians and Nubians, people looking like the same, ruled Egypt. One of the other myths that we have to educate ourselves about is this idea that Africa is poor and desolate, right? We love to talk about starving children and bang-belly children and suffering people and all the disease and all of that. As I told a student in a class, you can't experiment on a group of people and then say, well, this is where all the diseases were found. Because part of what colonialism and slavery did was to experiment on people that look like us. In other words, from colonial times to the present, many persons have been experimented on, right? And so when we talk about this is now not an affront to say, well, I'm against medicine. This is to point to the historical reality that so much of what has been experimented and found out about disease came as a result of exploiting Africans. So Africa may not own all of her resources, or rather may not manage them, but Africa is replete with resources. Right? This is the natural resource composite of Africa. So let's go through. If you want ice, it's Africa. If you want bling, it's Africa. If you want to be chromas, it's Africa. If you want to use a cell phone, it's Africa. If you want bombs, it is Africa. Because almost a third of the world's uranium used to make bombs. Have you ever seen an African country deploy an atomic bomb? No. Right? 50% of the world's gold, 30% of its diamonds. So the point I'm making that Africa has the resources, it's not a question of natural resources, it's a question of who now owns, because of the process of slavery and colonialism, who owns those resources. The one I love to debunk is this idea that Africa and Africans are cursed. There was this idea when racist people were interpreting the Bible that Ham, from whom blacks are reputed, Africans are reputed to have descended, Ham was cursed by his father. And some went as far as to say that the curse was actually the black skin. If you go back to the book of beginnings, Genesis in the Bible, both as a descriptive but also as a historic book, Noah never cursed Ham. If you go back to Genesis 9 and 10, he says, "Cursed be Canaan," right? Ham was not cursed. He said, "Cursed be Canaan," that is his son. That was a Near Eastern tradition of cursing an offspring, and that includes children and grandchildren, which is why we get this idea that the sins of the father are visited on the children. Later on in Ezekiel, God says that he has done away with that in Ezekiel 18. But here, we are told that Ham is cursed. Ham is not cursed. And the idea is that the black skin is the curse, and therefore, black skin, dark skin people were not children of God. Why is that significant to talk about? Because let us be clear that because Christianity was Europeanized after the 2nd century, and a Europeanized notion of Christianity has dominated the world for the last 500 years, it doesn't mean that Africa does not have a pride of place in Christianity. In Egypt, yes, now an Islamic country, but Islam as a religion is not founded until 650 AD, right? Well over almost 700 years after Christianity is formed. So Egypt actually is the first African territory that Christianity takes root in terms of not just finding a few persons there, but it took root in Egypt. Aksum, also now modern day Ethiopia, becomes the second declared Christian nation in the entire world, long before the Holy Roman Empire, long before all of these other nations declared. Only one other nation in the world declared Christianity before Ethiopia, and that is Armenia, around 300 AD. So Aksum, and someone asked in the chat, and that is part of the long tradition of Christianity, which is why we have so many churches in that area called Lalibela in Ethiopia, from which we get the Ethiopian Orthodox and the Ethiopian Coptic Church. Yes, we have churches that were shaped out of single pieces of rock. Not only Aksum and Egypt, but also Nubia. Nubia was conquered by Aksum, and it maintained Christianity until around 760 AD, when the Muslims begin to expand into North Africa. So what's the point I'm making? When we make this argument that we reproduce Christianity is a white man religion and we don't serve a white God and all of these things, you are absolutely correct in the regard that there is no whiteness to God's divinity, because God is spirit. Marcus Garvey said, "I have no problem with the white man seeing God as white. The problem comes when he's telling me that I also should see God as white. If I am made in God's image and likeness, then if I am black, God is black." We call that anthropomorphism, giving human characteristics to a non-human persona. So God does not have color because spirits don't have color. But you best believe that the physical incarnation of God, Jesus, came on earth, and where he grew up and where he settled and where he walked, you know for a fact that his skin was not olive. You know for a fact that his hair was not straight and looked like he used Tresemme and Alberta VO5. That is not the incarnation that even people of European ancestry are willing to admit today. If you search popular mechanics, you'll see that in 2011, they developed a composite sketch of Jesus, and you would be surprised. I would advise you to go and look if you still have problems imaging Jesus as a dark-skinned, curly, scruffy-haired person. So I want you to understand again that our ancestors helped to shape Christianity. That Christianity finds solace in Africa when it was suffering persecution in Europe. So I want us to have a more fulsome picture than just ascribing singular knowledge. It's a white man's religion. It was never formed by the white man. It was never formed by the European. Christianity develops in Northeast Africa and Southwest Asia. Let me continue. I hope you are not bored. We have a few more to go, and then I want to do questions. So we have to understand the resilience of the ancestors. The enslaved or people or ancestors were resilient. Their language we have today, resilient. So much of our language, and thanks to Professor Maureen Warner-Lewis, the wife and co-laborer of my mentor, Professor Rupert Lewis, Garveyite, who taught us and who taught me in undergrad that so much of our language, patois, many words came from Congo and from East Central Africa. But our ancestors made a 5,000-mile journey, and that journey could have been 2 weeks, but as long as 3 months on a ship, under subhuman conditions, under oppressive conditions, and yet still they came here. They suffered under the ignobility of enslavement for 400 years, and yet still they passed on something to us. It is important, therefore, that we learn from the ancestors. And so the struggle for freedom in what the Rastas call Babylon was not fought for only to be surrendered by what we have today, what I call our deadly individualism. We have abandoned Ubuntu, and that word is an Nguni word from South Africa. Both the Zulu and the Xhosa people, the clicking language people, they are from the Nguni people, right? They are Bantu people. Bantu people started in West Africa around 3000 BC, and they migrated all the way down to South Africa. So the Khoisan people, most of the people of South Africa are descendants of the Bantu. So that word Ubuntu is from a phrase that says Ubuntu Gabantu Ubuntu, which literally means I am because we are. In other words, to give you a rendition of a song, I'm not going to sing it, but one of my favorite songs is the Manhattan song. He's singing about a girl, but I am talking about our people. It says, there's no me without you. That is what Ubuntu means. I am because we are. To honor the resilience of our ancestors, we must understand communitarianism, not communism, communitarianism. I am because we are. I don't get 4 degrees unless I have a community. Starting from Augustown all the way to Capitol Hill that I've been to do presentations, I am because we are. The ancestors made sacrifices. We are here because of sacrifice. Let us sacrifice for someone else other than me and mine. So it brings me to one of my shining lights, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, because I got introduced to him, of course, like everyone else, but let me not say like everyone else, in basic school. In basic school, I heard of Marcus Garvey, and I'm going to put some age on my age, but there was a time when I recalled, when I was very young, that Marcus Garvey's image was actually not on a coin, but on a paper note because the 50 cents was a paper note until the early 80s. Then later on it becomes a coin. But Marcus Garvey, the first national hero, transitioned in 1940, gave us a clear message and legacy of honoring our ancestors, that he had a Pan-African vision. Look at this copy of the Negro World, the paper of the UNIA. Africa, the land of hope and promise for Negro peoples of the world. Will Negroes allow the whites to take Africa? And Garvey was proclaiming a message that Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. That was the Pan-African message that Garvey embraced. Why? Because it was passed down from the ancestors in the 1800s. Alexander Crummell, Edward Wilmot Blyden, Martin Delaney, they said Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. And so we honor our ancestors by having a Pan-African vision. Not just what is happening in Jamaica, not just what is happening in Trinidad or Guyana or Barbados, but what is happening across the world, but also on the motherland. Right? I know it's the UNIA meeting, but not everyone on here may be a member of the UNIA. But Garvey had membership, the UNIA had membership across the world, right? Across the world. And by 1922, some repute that there were about 6 million members of the UNIA. So Garvey creates a mass movement, creates a global movement without social media. There was no hashtag, there was no blasting this, there was no sharing. It was a message of fire that the black man is to rule Africa, because Africa is the land of blacks. And so if anybody is going to rule Africa, it should be the people who are Africans. That is what the slogan means. And it is still relevant today. Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. So Garvey reflects this Pan-African idea that people of African descent should seek to build Africa into an independent continent. That is why the motto of Garvey's UNIA is so Pan-African: one God, one aim, one destiny. Garvey espoused Christianity, but he espoused a notion that envisions a God that looks like him. One aim, the aim was liberation of the continent, and one destiny, that all of us should return. Now we know that Garvey made it clear that the lazy and the slothful would be equally lazy and slothful in Africa, so he wants people who are industrious to go back and build up the motherland. And the Rastas, under the agreement with Emperor Haile Selassie after he leaves here in 1966 April, develops land in Shashamane in the eastern part of Ethiopia for those who wanted to resettle there. So Garvey makes it clear that the Pan-African aim of the UNIA, and what should be the aim of all of us, is that the Negro peoples of the world should concentrate upon the object of building up for themselves a great nation in Africa. So you may be saying, well, am I saying that you should leave now and go to Africa? No, because you'd have to first figure out what country you're going to. But if you build up the people of Africa, scattered as they are around the world, you are building up Africa. Garvey says everybody knows that there is absolutely no difference between the native African and the American and West Indian Negroes, in that we are descendants of one family stock. And Garvey articulated a philosophy that said race first. He articulated this notion that says race first, right? People accuse him of being racially supremacist. But when you are coming from a perspective of being miseducated, you have to educate yourself and elevate yourself in such a way that those who previously oppressed you are going to accuse you of being supremacist because you have reclaimed your dignity and your humanity. So after this lecture, you can't say slaves came over, Africans came over. 27 million of them left Africa, 9 million made it here, but Africans came over, no slaves came over. So how do we honor our ancestors? Right? We advocate for reparations, because reparations for enslavement is not now, oh, let bygones be bygones. One, the unjust enrichment by European countries justifies the reparations. Whether or not you have given us development aid and all of that, until you can first admit and accept your wrong and the profiting of you from that wrong, we cannot accept anything else. Why? Because if someone comes to you and gives you back something without ever saying that, I'm sorry I took it, you may not receive it in the same kind. And I'm saying to you that the first and elemental step of reparation is an apology or an acknowledgement. I want us to be clear that is not the end of reparations, that is the beginning of reparations, right? The second way in which we honor our ancestors, by cultural connection to the knowledge and traditions of Africa. Some of us think that to identify as African is devilish because we have been Europeanized in a notion that anything African is devilish. Of course, we must be discriminatory. I'm not telling you to accept everything from the ancestors, but I'm telling you that you have to seek and search for yourself. Don't accept received wisdom just because someone tells you that. Have a cultural connection to the knowledge and traditions of Africa. We have many in Jamaica that we used to do, even talking about Jankano and talking about the ways in which we understood Ghana, and we understood the people from Senegal and Mandingo and the Wolof people and people from Nigeria and our connection to Nigeria and to Congo. We have to have a connection to the continent if we are going to honor our ancestors. So, I want to wrap up quickly. I know we are out of time, but I want to give a quick assessment of reparations so we understand that even those who are of the same complexion as I am may be saying, well, a long time that and too much things are going on. Well, bear in mind that the British Crown and many European countries continue to benefit and profit from that initial investment as a result of partaking in the transatlantic trade in Africa. So you can't talk about the House of Windsor, that is the ruling house under the British Crown, without talking about the House of Saxe-Coburg Gotha, originate in Germany. And you can't talk about how since the grand design of Oliver Cromwell of 1655, how the British have benefited from the proceeds of slavery. And when you multiply that effect, it's a debt that they can never pay, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't pay it down. We are all Jamaicans. We know when we talk about hire purchase, you're paying for this stove and you're going to pay it six times more. But you know that you are paying it down, right? The unjust enrichment. I don't want to knock anybody that support Liverpool, but Liverpool was a slave port. So much of our ancestors, the final output of their work went to Liverpool at the Gorey warehouse and then went back to Africa. Not empty, but with goods to sell there to the Africans to trade and then to load up with other Africans to come to the Caribbean. We have to understand that reparation is land. We have crowned lands that are sitting in Jamaica that are not owned, let me surprise you, by the government of Jamaica, but by the British Crown, while people are here being called squatters, while we have an abundance of land, we have not resettled land in the interest of the people. And that's an indictment against all political regimes that have administered land in Jamaica. But until we dissociate from the legacy of the monarchy, we cannot fully tie ourselves away from the legacy of slavery. And it is not as radical as people think. Dominica did it when it was being independent in the 1970s. Trinidad has done it. Guyana has done it. So let us be clear. Monetary compensation is required because in 1834, the British Crown borrowed from the British people a loan of £20 million to give to planters across the British West Indies as reparation. Yes, you heard it right. The planters were given reparations for slavery, not the enslaved. They got £20 million. Richard Drayton, historian, calculates that in 2015 dollars, that would be worth £20 billion. So imagine that investment over 100 and odd years. Memorations and commemorations, not just of the abolition of the slave trade. We want concrete celebration. Every time this anniversary come around, you're supposed to give us something tangible. Yes, debt cancellation. Yes, the repatriation of stolen treasures, both from Africa as well as from the Caribbean. Yes, development transfers. But that's what I want to understand, that reparations is far more than them putting a check and everybody get one. We have land. Let all our lands revert to the people here. Government of the people, for the people, and by the people. How can we talk about democracy when someone external to us determines the acreage of our lands? The King's House is not on Jamaican property. It's not Jamaican-owned property. It's Crown lands. So what are the criteria for reparations? Mari Matsuda essentially says, the part that is blacked out, it should say that a harm was done, right? Second, the victims of the harm are a distinct group. And third, that they must continue to suffer harm, right? Institutional racism and socioeconomic inequality. So the people of the West Indies, the people of Jamaica, we have enough grounds. The people of the Caribbean, formerly enslaved by the British, have grounds, for reparations, because the initial investment model that I advocate for, or what I call the initial investment model, means that if you have an initial investment as a result of slavery and you multiply that over the 300 plus years, then you have been unjustly enriched by it. You may have seen in the paper that Berlin is agreeing to return artifacts it took from Benin and Nigeria, and is now pressuring Britain to do the same. The British Crown has not allowed access to so many of the residences and castles of the British monarchy that have in them stolen artifacts from around the world. So reparations is not just a Rastafari cry, it should be a people's cry for justice. I want to make a clear distinction that I believe that we are not yet free. And when you look at what I'm saying, then you'll understand. We got emancipation in 1834, formally in Jamaica, in 1863 in the US. It ended legal authority over enslaved Africans. We got independence, which was a formal political separation from a colonial government. What we have not yet completed is freedom. Freedom is when a people can direct and decide for themselves the direction of their country without unsolicited interference. It is the economic, social, cultural, political, philosophical ability to direct one's country. So we have had emancipation. We have even had independence because we have a flag that was raised for the first time on August 6, 1962. But we don't have freedom as yet. And so reparations, as I implied, is when a harm has been done and injury has taken place, and that those who benefited from the initial harm continue to benefit, and those who were the descendants of those who suffered the initial harm continue to also suffer as a result of this. I'm not giving the idea that reparations is designed to enrich people. So I'm not saying now that whatever the British Crown and whatever universities and private holdings such as banks, Lloyds and all these other banks in England and all across the world owe us that we are going to become rich. The point of reparations is not to make people rich. It is to honor the legacy, the sacrifices of our ancestors. Let me skip here. So I already said that about when slave owners receive reparations. But you may not know that in the US, in Washington, D.C., not a state, because D.C. is not a state, but the capital, when slavery was abolished, the former slave owners received compensation. Lincoln feared, because they supported the Union, he rewarded them by essentially compensating them $300 for every slave that was freed. The largest individual payout was $18,000. Now, I want you to understand in the American context that if black people, those of the enslaved descendants, would have had $300 given to each of them at the end of slavery, and that had been allowed to multiply into the present, would have had a different America. So the descendants of slave masters got compensation, including land, that they could pass on for hundreds of years, and instead blacks were allowed to pass on poverty across generations. I want to conclude like St. Paul in Philippians, he says, and finally, my brethren. But after that, he still had two more books of the Bible. So finally, my brethren, my brothers and sisters, let us quickly define racism, and then we have only 3 more slides to go. Thank you very much for your time and your patience. So we think of racism as someone not liking another, but I think of it in more a systemic way. It's not just prejudice. All of us have prejudices. We may even have racial prejudices, but racism is when you combine racial prejudice with privilege and with power, right? So racism is a system of domination that normalizes the privilege for whites and for things that are white. Racism is not just that way. It may be subtle, aesthetics, why we prefer lighter skinned over darker skinned men and women, why we understand beauty to be a standard of someone with long flowing hair than somebody with locks or natural hair. Those are also given to us as a result of racism. Where did we learn to hate ourselves? Where did we learn to hate our skin? Where did we learn to prefer and privilege others over us? Racism has been our schoolmaster for almost 400 years. But we have to rebel and teach ourselves an alternate curriculum, and that is one that is grounded in liberation through knowledge of our ancestors. Systemic racism is really talking about the reality that racism is entrenched into a system, right? That blacks and whites and all peoples are in a system of racism that again privileges whites. Economic power, the resource inequality, all of that is as a result of racism. And finally, the word institutionalized racism, or the term, was coined around 1967 by Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton. And it says the patterns of racism built into this society's major institution. Hear what it says there. More than the actions of scattered white bigots. So racism isn't I hate. It may also be people that essentially structure institutions that negatively impact people of color. And that doesn't matter whether you are in Jamaica or you're in the US. That racism structures the relationship. We in Jamaica love to be in collective denial that we don't have racism, we have classism and colorism. Well, if racism is the father, the offsprings are certainly colorism and classism. So if we did a DNA test to find out who is the father of classism and colorism, it would be racism. No jacket around here. And here we go. We also honor our ancestors by educating our people with the goal of transformation and not schooling them for conformity and acceptance of inferiority. So much of us, the knowledge we have about self and about Africa was given to people who did not think Africa valued anything. So we have to educate our people for transformation, not for conformity and acceptance. And I've been a strident advocate since my undergraduate years for Garveyism and the philosophy of Garveyism, not just as Garvey, but as a Pan-African philosophy that still has contemporary global relevance, that it should be taught in our educational systems. We can learn about all the poets and all the literarists from other civilizations, European civilizations. It is important to learn them, but we are not introduced to Africa in a positive way until we are well into adulthood, and some of us never get introduced because we have been stuck in a Europeanized notion of the world. Teaching Garveyism will instill race pride, will instill collective security, will instill self-reliance in our children that will make self-reliant and proud people of Africa. And so here is the final slide. See, the slide doesn't even want to come up. It doesn't want us to end. Here we are. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to embrace both Sankofa and Ubuntu. We have to return to the past and fetch ourselves. And when we have done so, because we are a community, we should also educate someone else about the levels of miseducation you previously suffered from. And you go back and you tell them, that is I am because we are. I remember the story of the lepers in the book of Kings. They were discarded. No one would listen to them. People were eating people as a result of the famine. But they came upon a camp that had been deserted and found precious food, found jewels, found all sorts of treasures. And they said, but we can't keep it to ourselves and people are starving and dying. We have to share it. I'm saying to you that whatever knowledge you have found, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Sankofa must be combined with Ubuntu. Ashe. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we went a bit over with time, but I can tell you that that is no problem for us, because what we got a while ago was an excellent presentation on our history, why we should value our history, and why we should have a sense of pride in who we are as a people and where we are coming from. I have sat several presentations, been a strong proponent of reparations and just generally having a passion for issues and conversations surrounding this topic. I've sat in several presentations. But listening a while ago, I can say with a high degree of confidence and certainty that my enlightenment on the issue has heightened. And I think I can say that that is generally the remark that persons would give as it relates to the quality presentation that we received from Dr. Mcalpine. And I would want to say thank you very much, sir, for presenting to us. We have someone on our program who will deliver the keynote, will deliver the vote of thanks to the keynote speaker. At this time, I am going to invite Mr. Daniel Martin. Mr. Daniel Martin is the president of the UNIA Jamaica chapter, and he will bring his remarks. I remember Mr. Martin reaching out to me, asking if I would love to be a part of this. And at the time, I did not give a confirmation because I had several other things on my schedule to do. But having heard the presentation from Dr. Mcalpine, I can say that I made the right choice in being here today. Daniel, Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. All right, Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Cleveland Tomlinson, the President of the UNIA Jamaica, and specially invited guests, Mr. Stephen Golding, President of the USU, Mr. Khalil Hutchinson, the chapter presidents, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Marcus Garvey famously wrote, "A people without knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." Let me thank you again for joining the UTech UNIA chapter on this day as we commemorate the abolition of slavery and also strengthen our call for the process of reparation. To begin, it is fitting that we join here today under the theme honoring our ancestors from Africa to the present. We have much thanks for all the historians, economists, anthropologists, archaeologists, and geneticists who have studied the history and consequence of the transatlantic slave trade across the African diaspora. We should continue to work to advance knowledge and research on the transatlantic slave trade so that millions of descendants of the enslaved recognize that their history did not start from slavery on some plantation in the South. The education system is partially to blame for this tragedy where our youth actually believe their history started with slavery. When I interacted with high school students across the island and other youths, I can see the discomfort, pain when discussions lead to slavery. If this is the only time that they see themselves in history, this should not be. So we have to educate them and let them know that their history did not start with slavery, but our ancestors went through that period. They must know that they are descendants of proud, productive, purposeful people who have resisted and survived the worst Holocaust in history of the world. It is this history that ties us, people, or it connects us in African diaspora. Whether it is the binding, the shared experience, it is what brought us all here together, the tie that connects, the bind. It connects people in one of the greatest continents on this planet, the African continent. The African continent is rich in minerals, as Dr. Mcalpine has stated, and resources and biological diversity. But also one of that historical, because of the biology and geography it has inhabited, were labeled inferior and then enslaved. This tie binds shared culture. One horrible feature of the transatlantic slave trade that I should comment on was the attempt by the enslavers to purge the West African tradition and cultures of the enslaved. The shared culture across the diaspora shared as a beacon, alerting lost descendants to home unknown. Africans Americans and Africans in the diaspora of the New World have had unique population history shared by no other group on the planet. This unique history was predicated on the loss of family ties and cultural ties and dehumanization. Ladies and gentlemen, let us continue the work of the Honorable Mosiah Garvey as we continue to ensure that our history is not lost. We must continue to call for reparatory justice to be given. And let me also check if Mansa Musa Mali is related to me, because right now I could use some of that wealth to help me with my UTech tuition. I thank you guys for coming out today. And we have a special event. We have I should say. The vote of thanks will be given shortly. And we have another person on the program that will be carrying out a special song for us, or singing for us, I should say. Thank you again. Mr. Tomlinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. And consistent with our program, at this time, we will open the platform and allow for question and answers. We received a substantial presentation, quality presentation from Dr. Mcalpine. And in that regard, I think it is quite fitting for an audience that has been stimulated to have questions to pose to the presenter. So Dr. Mcalpine, we are at that point in our program where we will have our question and answer sessions. Individuals, our participants or attendees here can raise their hands using the raised hand feature of the platform. I will identify you and you unmute your microphone and ask your question. Okay? So that is how the process will flow. So, are you ready, Dr. Mcalpine?
Cleveland, it's actually Dr. Mcalpine. Sorry about that.
Yes, I'm here. Go ahead. The question.
All right. Do we have anyone would like to ask question of the presenter? We have Christina Williams. Christina, you may go ahead, unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay, good day. Thank you. So it's part question, part commentary. So I'm very interested in my history, and I've always tried to take an intentional approach to it in reading and doing my own research. And I've seen how religion is so intertwined with the history that we have, or let me say the history that we have been fed. I just wanted some comments on the Black Madonna, which I'm sure you're aware of, Dr. Mcalpine. That we did have the Black Madonna, and even at one point the Pope used to pray to the Black Madonna, and then it was just in relation to your comments earlier about the white Christ, quote unquote. And then the second thing I wanted to comment on was pretty much how our academia is still very much inherently racist, and how the curriculum that we have in our school is so whitewashed that it takes us coming to a session like this, for some of us, takes us coming to a session like this to be able to be exposed to information of this nature. That even though we do have Caribbean history in our schools to some extent, and we do have social studies, etc., it still does not go into these intricacies, these nuances that I think as Black people, as Black students who are supposed to go on to become Black leaders, it becomes important. And the final comment I have is, for repatriation, I have taken on this additional step where I see Black leadership as a part of repatriation. So
you mean reparations or repatriation?
Oh, yes, reparations, my bad. Yes, reparations. There's certain things that I want to do with my life that I feel as if we need to go after it, because it's a part of us regaining that level of power and influence that we have, or we have the right to access as well. So now look at, for example, we recently for the World Trade Organization, we had our first Black leader, our first Black female leader. I find those aspects as a kind of reparations. I don't know, what are your comments on that? Thank you.
Well, let me answer. Thank you, Christina. Let me answer them in turn quickly to allow for others to ask a question. Until the period of the Renaissance, I often tell persons that Africa did not have a dark age. The dark ages happened in Europe between the 10th and 15th century. During that time, Africa was actually expanding, including from 750 AD, controlling and essentially civilizing, and I love to use that word in reverse, making Africa civilized and Europe not so much, civilizing Spain and Portugal, because the Berbers and the Moors from North Africa ruled and developed Spain for about 700 years. Why is that important? So much of the images we have of the Madonna, the Christ, of David, all of them were painted by whom? Renaissance painters were Europeans. That begins a 600-year tradition of Europeanizing all of the figures of the Bible. So if you go to the Sistine Chapel, if you go to all these museums, you see depictions of Peter, of Paul, of Jesus, of Adam, of David, of Solomon, all depicted as Europeans. Because if you ask a European to paint, he is, and I have no problem with that, with those images. The problem comes when you negate both the historical accuracy of those images as well as my ability and my my individuality to envision and to vision God and Christ looking like me. And so images of darker skinned depictions both of Christ, of his disciples, they were around for most of the time up until until the middle of the 15th century. So certainly that is not unforeseen, because like I said, if Jesus looked like he looked, and I hope you search that image by Popular Mechanics, simply search picture of Jesus, Popular Mechanics, and you'll see that image. If Jesus looked like that, then I would argue that Mary, his mother, would certainly not look like how she has been depicted. Now, images are important to people who humanize God, right? We think of God in human form, in human context. And so those images are important. The question of reparations within the context of Black leadership must have an asterisk beside it, because we have to understand that the phenotype and the pigmentation of one does not point towards the politics philosophy of that person. So we can think of many persons who are Black who have been against and fought against people who thought of Africa as powerful and viable. We can think of persons, political leaders of Black skins, with what Fanon calls white masks, right? So Frantz Fanon, writing about the pathos or the psychology of oppression, he says in effect that many have Black skins but white masks, right? That is the essence of what racism has done to us, that our skin may be Black, but our notions of the world certainly are not. And so it is important to understand that it's not just the color and race of leadership, it is also their politics and their orientation. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you very much. I see another hand raised. Stefan? Stefan, do you have a question? I am not seeing any surname, just Stefan. All right. Do we have any more questions? All right. If we do not have any more questions, I want to thank again our keynote speaker for facilitating our question and answer segment.
Stefan is here.
Oh, Stefan is here. I was not hearing you clearly a while ago. So, Stefan, do you have a question you want to pose to our keynote speaker? Go ahead.
Yes. Good afternoon, though.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Doctor. Permit me to use the term transatlantic war from the perspective of the captive, right? I think the traders would say it's a transatlantic slave trade, but for me, who was in chain, I was fighting for my life, so I consider it a transatlantic war, right? Before that transatlantic war, what are your perspectives on the idea that Africans were already in the diaspora, were already in the Caribbean before or prior to the transatlantic war?
Right. So I indicated that in my presentation that they came before Columbus. That is actually the title of a book by Ivan van Sertima, that traces the African presence long before Columbian times, tracing it to as recent or to as late as 3000 BC. And so from that time, we had seafaring Africans who had left the western parts of Africa, more than likely where the Sahara begins to become a larger desert, because 40% of Africa is now desert. But 5,000 years ago, that was less than 20%. Over time, it grew. As it grew, people left. Populations migrated. Some took to the sea. And we have evidence from some of the earliest peoples here. Though we are often told of Incans and Mayans, we have perceived them to only be what we call Amerindian in nature, but there are clear African ancestry. If you think of the Olmecs in Mexico, if you think of the Kalinagos and what we pejoratively once called the Caribs and the Arawaks, many of them would have copulated with darker skinned Africans, and over time would have settled here. Importantly, it was not a mystery when Columbus came. Many of his logs, though we have not often been told about them, many of his logs and even the people that helped him to traverse here were Africans who were in Europe, who understood seafaring and navigating. And when he came here, he also saw people of darker skin. So it's incontrovertible, but now when you say it, it is almost as if you're making up a tale, because as I tell people all the time, that is what a myth is. If you say it often enough, long enough, and enough people believe it, you are going to have a hard time convincing people it is false, right? And so the same thing happened, that when you tell people that people of African descent have been here for thousands of years, they're like, no, Columbus brought them over. Absolutely not. They were seafarers from around 3000 BC.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? If not, we are going to close our question and answer segment. And proceeding with our program at this time, I'm going to invite Mr. Nicholas Henry, a UTech Jamaica law student, to present an item. Is Mr. Nicholas Henry with us? I am not seeing him in the chat. All right. He's here. I've been told that he's here. Okay, Mr. Nicholas Henry, are you here? Can you unmute your microphone and present for us?
Mr. Tomlinson?
Yes.
If I may, Nicholas has been having some challenges, so I suppose he at this thing no. So if he's unable to open his mic, that would have been the reason.
Okay. All right. So in that regard, we are going to proceed with. I see his microphone being opened. Nicholas Henry. Okay. All right. So in that regard, we are going to proceed with our program. At this time, I am going to invite Tavis Campbell of the UNIA.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, that's Nicholas Henry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible. Nicholas Henry? There seems to be some.
Are you hearing me, everybody?
Yes, Nicholas, you are being heard.
Hear you. Okay, you're hearing me. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
What you have to say, the sound of freedom. What you have to say, the sounds of freedom. It's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets? Well, we stand aside and look. Oh, fear for atomic energy. Oh. What you have to say, these songs of freedom, it's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song. Oh, redemption song. Emancipate yourself. Oh, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Oh, what you have to say, these songs of freedom, it's all I had. Redemption song, redemption song, redemption song, redemption song, redemption song.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. That was an excellent performance and a song that is quite fitting for the context within which we are having our distinguished lecture. So we were given an excellent presentation from our keynote speaker, and we were given quite a soothing presentation from Mr. Nicholas Henry. Thank you very much on behalf of the UNIA Jamaica chapter. We are approaching the end of our program, and at this time I'm going to invite Tavis Campbell from the UNIA Jamaica University College chapter. If there's something you realize is that there are the various chapters of various universities are all collaborating because we understand together the importance of commemorating the ending of the transatlantic slave trade. So we have Church Teachers College UNIA chapter with us, Jamaica UNIA chapter. And at this time, I invite Tavis Campbell to give a poem, an ode to the flag.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My esteemed pleasure. This flag of mine, written by the late widow of Marcus Garvey, Mrs. Amy Jakes Garvey. Regardless of what was said of it, here's to this flag of mine, the red, black, and green. Hopes of it in the future, bright Africa, are seen. Here's to the red of it. Great nations shall know of it in time to come. Red blood shall flow of it. Historians will write of it. Great flag of mine. Here's to the black of it. 400 million back of it. Whose destiny depends on it. The red, black, and green of it. Oh, great flag of mine. Here's to the green of it. Young men shall dream of it. Face shot on shells of it, waving so high. Here's to the whole of it. Colors, drawth, and pole of it. Pleased is my soul with it. Regardless of what is told of it, thanks God for giving it this great flag of mine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cunningham from the Jamaica UNIA chapter. Thank you for that presentation. The words, I hope, will resonate with our attendees this afternoon. We're at the end of our program, ladies and gentlemen. I have been stimulated. The presentation from the keynote speaker resonates with me, and the words of the song from Mr. Nicholas Henry and the words of the poem from Mr. Tavis Cunningham, powerful words. And I am leaving this session feeling as if I have been enlightened and empowered, and I'm happy to have been here. I'm going to invite this time our keynote, our vote of the individual to do our vote of thanks, Janelle Toad of the UTEC Jamaica UNIA chapter. Ms. Toad.
Good afternoon, everybody. You know that the lecture was stimulating when the moderator wants to introduce the speaker a second time. Yes. So today, I think everybody has echoed thanks because it was such a well put together event today. And on behalf of UNIA UTEC and UNIA in its entirety, I want to give a hearty thank you to all the participants and even more so the organizers. I think it really is inspiring to find that there is interest in this topic and people joined in today to really widen their perspective on this topic. But firstly, before we even get to anybody, I think I have to mention Mr. Stephen Tomlinson. I think everyone here can agree that Mr. Tomlinson did a very good job. I think it goes without saying that doing that kind of job only comes from enthusiasm and passion. So a very hearty thank you, sir, for being so engaged with us today as our moderator. Also thanks to Mr. Stephen Golding for extending our welcome today. I know Melda was not here, but Melda's representative, VP, thank you so much for opening remarks as well. Today we got some very riveting presentation. We learned of some of the major myths that are out there, that we have a duty, having gained this knowledge, have a duty to go and dispel these myths. So, and further to that, deeper workings of reparation and what that entails. So thank you again, Dr. Mcalpine, for that riveting presentation. Also, thanks to Mr. Tavis Cunningham for presentation of that poem, Ode to the Flag. Very, very substantive poem, and I do encourage anyone after today to go back and really look at the meaning and what the author there is really trying to say in that poem. Also, thank you to Mr. Nicholas Henry for that wonderful rendition of a very classic song. Very classic song. And thank you everyone, most of all, for joining today, staying with us throughout the entirety of the event and gaining knowledge with us today. We all now have a duty to go out and dispel these myths and tell our part of history the way it should be. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the execution of this event next year. I see the hand of our president of the UNIA chapter, Mr. Martin, with his hand raised. Is that what I'm seeing? Oh, no, his hand.
Yes, I just want to say very much thanks again to everyone. And I'm looking forward for a panel discussion next after this, because each time I've the privilege to hear from Mr. Mcalpine. It's been very stimulating, and I want to just invite him again. So next time I think it will definitely be another panel discussion, sir, and we will be looking forward to hearing from you again. And thank you very much.
Yes. If I may use this platform to open and give an invitation to Mr. Mcalpine to join me and my debate coach on a radio program. This riveting, interesting conversation is one that I think should be brought to the national airwaves, and the people of Jamaica should have knowledge of this. And in that regard, Mr. Mcalpine, we will reach out to you to have you speak on our radio program on New Start 93 FM. That is how interesting and that's how resonating your presentation is with me.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your
play the national anthem as we end today. The playing of the national anthem.
Correction, not the national anthem, but the anthem of the UNIA.
The anthem of the UNIA. My apologies. Thank you for that correction. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.